Hi, welcome to Lady Overlander Radio. Tonight we're chatting with Angela and Annika of the Wonder Year book. Stay tuned.
Grab your favorite drink, whether it's a coffee, cocktail, or tea, and get ready. It's Ladies' Night on Lady Overlander Radio. The Lady Overlander Radio podcast is sponsored by Frontrunner Outfitters, Midland Radio, Go Treads, Sport Keg, CB Adventure Supply, Adventure Trail Outfitters, Overland Spices, and the More Expo.
Hey, Arla. Hey, girl. Hey.
Hey, girl. Hey.
So, how you been, Arla?
Good. It's a little warm here. I'm ready for fall weather. I don't understand.
I know.
It's 90 degrees today. I'm over it. I've been saying that for months. I'm done.
Yeah, it was cool last night. It was actually really cool, and we had a nice wind from the north. So it was amazing. We had the windows open. It was wonderful. Today got hot again. So and we're still waiting for the AC repair guy. So it's a little toasty in here, but we're making do. The AC, so it's one of those 20-year ACs, and this is a 20-year-old cabin, and I guess it reached its lifetime. So it's.
Of course it did.
Yeah.
Of course it did. Right after you buy it. Of course it did.
Mm-hmm. That's fine. Also, the home warranty people said that they don't have anybody in the area that can honor the home warranty, so I have to find them on my own. Yeah.
Yay for living in the woods and off grid.
Yes. Out in the woods. But anyway.
That sucks.
So that's not why we're here tonight, though. We're here tonight to chat with these two lovely ladies, Annika and Angela, and we're here to talk about the book that you guys co-wrote with Julie, who could not be with us tonight, called The Wonder Year, a guide to long-term family travel. So we're very excited to talk about this book. We're very excited to meet you guys and get into the weeds with everything and find out all the great tips and trips you guys have to offer. So we're going to start with you, Angela, and go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll jump over to you, Annika.
Thank you so much for having us here tonight. I'm Angela. I'm originally from Ohio, and I've lived quite a few places across the U.S., and my family was living in the San Francisco Bay Area for nearly 20 years before we launched on our own Wonder Year. My husband and I have two kids, both boys, and they were 9 and 12 when we started worldschooling. And prior to that, they'd been enrolled in public schools and in loads of sports and activities before we launched. And just briefly on the professional side, I have an engineering degree and an MBA from Berkeley, and my career background's healthcare and biotechnology before I took a detour in a different direction of life.
Very awesome. Thank you. Annika?
Yeah, hi, my name's Annika, and I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. In my earlier life, I'd spent a lot of time with my own family traveling around in a VW bus and had wonderful memories from that. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Thailand and Laos. And then I got my education degree from Stanford University, and I was a public school teacher for many years. Now I live in Boulder, Colorado, and we were on the road for 1 year with our 8, 9, and 12-year-olds. We went to 7 countries and 3 continents in 1 year and world schooled them. Yeah.
Very cool. Arla has how old is she now? 13-year-old?
She's 13. She'll be 14 in about 6 weeks. God help me.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And I have 2 14-year-olds and a 12-year-old. So Arla's daughter still goes to public school, trying to convince her to homeschool, but it takes some time.
I'm not a teacher. I'm not about that life. I'm sorry. Nope.
Yeah.
No.
It's a challenge, but it's a lot of fun as well. So why don't we go ahead and talk about what gave you guys the idea of writing this book? Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So when I was in my 20s and working in student travel, I thought I wanted to do that with my own kids one day. And so my husband also thought that was a good idea, which is really lucky of me. And when I was trying to figure out the nuts and bolts of how to do this and how to educate my kids on the road, because Arla, it's anyone can do it, I promise. And when I started to look at how to do that, I couldn't find a book about it. I could find a lot of disparate information online, but there was no go-to resource out there. And so I knew Julie, our third co-author, because our kids were in the same preschool together, and I knew that she had done a year on the road in her RV. And so she gave me lots and lots of ideas and kind of the logistical backbone of doing a year like this. And then I also met Angela through a mutual friend, and she'll tell you about it in a bit. But she did 2 years on the road, both domestic in an RV and overseas. And she also gave me lots of important tips and tricks. But mostly what both of them gave me was that pat on the back encouragement to do it. They both told me you're not a bad mom for wanting to pull your kids from the educational setting, and it is doable. And so that's really what prompted this book. Because when I got home from my trip, I kept looking for that book. Someone must have written it by now, and nobody had. And so what started keeping me up at night was maybe I should write that book. And so then I reached out to both Julie and Angela because writing it with a friend, two friends, sounded like a lot more fun than toiling away by myself. So that's how the book was born.
That's
And
awesome.
they said yes, and here we are.
Yeah, but that was probably a big leap for you, being a public school teacher, deciding to make that move and pull your kids out of school and travel with them and educate them on the road. That's pretty brave.
It seemed like something that not many people around me were doing. And that's why I think, we tried to write our book with that trusted friend approach, that you got this, others have done it, and you can do it too. And these are some of the inside information that would be helpful to you, but also sharing kind of the underbelly, that it's not always perfect, as maybe you two know as well.
No, it's not. We actually, like I was saying before the show started, we've been homeschooling, road schooling for the past 6 years, and it's definitely had its ups and downs. And we've tried different curriculums, and we've done unschooling, and we've done hybrid, and we're constantly evolving with the way that we're introducing concepts and ideas to the kids. But it's not as easy as it sounds at times either. So there's some days that nobody feels like doing school, and some of those days we just don't do it that day, and I think that's okay. But I don't think that we don't really do like a regular structured school day normally. They have their classes that they have to do now. They get them done. Some of them prefer to do it in the morning. Some do it in the evening. Some do it in the middle of the day. We kind of just go with the flow. And I think that blows people's minds, though, because I was staying with a friend recently, and her kids had to go to bed at 8:30 because they had to be up at 5:30 for school in the morning. And she said, "Well, what time are your kids going to bed?" I said, "Probably about 10 or 11. She said, what time do they get up for school?" I said, "About 8 or so. And then they eat breakfast and everything. And then they get started." And she's like, "Oh, okay." But that was unheard of when I was a kid. You went to bed at 8 o'clock, you got up in early morning, you got on the school bus, and that was it, So it's interesting to see how things have evolved over the years, and how I believe homeschooling, world schooling, road schooling, all of those have kind of come into a little bit more of the norm. I think it's still the unusual way to go, but it's a little more of the norm. Would you agree with that, Angela?
Definitely. And I was like Arla. I just want to say I am not a teacher, and my kids were in public school and doing fine. And I felt like I was leaving the education. I was an involved parent. I knew what was going on, but I was leaving most of their education to the teachers. And so when I started, it was cold. I had no idea what I was doing. And, I started by researching a ton and trying to gather information in all the different ways I could do it. And then I got overwhelmed by all the different ways I could do it. And then within the first month of being out there, it changed completely again. And Misty, I agree with what you're saying. Not only while we were on the road, where I was adapting and changing all the time, but then when we got back home, same with my kids across the subsequent years. Felt like we were always reassessing and reevaluating. But I could do that better because I had been more involved in their education. So, it depends on where you start from, but I agree with Annika. You can do it, and there's a lot of flexibility. Misty, what you were talking about, that flexibility to respond to each kid. What do they need at a certain point in time? What do they need day by day? But then what do they need month by month and year by year? I love being able to adapt to that. And to the last point, you talked about, yes, awareness. I think awareness has changed dramatically, both in terms of homeschooling acceptance and what people think that means and what they know it means, but world schooling and road schooling in particular has really blossomed the last 5 years in particular.
Yeah, as I was mentioning before, I know several families that are currently traveling internationally and homeschooling their kids, and they go to different, world school pop-ups and, temporarily enroll their child in, like my friends are in South America right now. They enrolled their son in Spanish, and kind of immerse him in the local education system there. And they, that's what I like about world schooling specifically, is that as you travel, you can meet up with other families. You can do all kinds of different activities together, where you can enroll your child in a local school for a little while and let them have that experience. So it really is very flexible.
And so when my family went, I feel like we kind of did our thing. Like we connected with some people along the way, but I didn't know about all the things that you're talking about. Back then there were summits and the hubs and pop-ups were starting.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things we try to do in the book is put all those things on the menu, right? Because if you don't even know what to ask, you don't know what's out there. And you're right, there are so many different ways to do it. We try to break it down into all the ways you can tap into teachers in the world. So homeschooling, often we're the teachers. You can lean on some other resources, but world schooling and road schooling, you can really be out there and tap into lots of other resources for your kids as well.
I agree.
And I wanted to share, one of the pop-ups is run by Rachel Carlson. It's called World School Pop-Up Hubs. And some families have been keeping up with each other over the years, so much so that they had their own prom in Normandy. They rented a castle, and these world school kids had their prom with these lifelong friends that they've been meeting up with. And so there is really a true sense of community out there. And so those are the pop-ups. But then there's also these hubs where people will hire teachers, and you can go there for a full month. And sometimes it's, you pay a fee. Sometimes it's a co-op kind of a situation. But there are all kinds of really interesting options these days.
Yeah,
one
absolutely.
other piece that's expanding, I feel like now what's happening is that there's new companies also folding in the digital nomad aspect of working remotely. So we all got a really big look at working remotely and schooling our kids with distance learning in whatever form that was for people during the pandemic. But it really has opened up, I think, a lot of families thinking about how they can work and educate at the same time. So there's some companies like Boundless Life and Working Without Borders and others popping up that offer kind of a package all in one, accommodations, a place to work, activities and education for both adults and kids. So it really runs the gamut all the way from something like that to still somebody doing it. It's our family doing it on our own on the road.
That's awesome. So how do you recommend people earn income on the road? You mentioned remote work. Have you guys experienced any different ways of earning income while you were traveling?
Well, I'll let Angela speak to this, but I want to share just, really quickly here that We were small business owners as well before we left. We own a vinyl record store in Boulder,
Ooh.
Colorado, and we really worked, 5 years leading up to our trip, getting managers and everybody ready to hold down the fort. So, we rented out our house, and that was a big source of income for us, especially the places that we went to. Nepal, you can live on not a whole lot of money. Maybe you'd be hard pressed to spend $100 for a family of 5 for a week. So, the other part of that is just, dialing back your expenses. And there's a recent statistic I just want to throw out that I've just seen that of the digital nomads out there right now, more than 70% have kids with them. So
Mm-hmm.
I think the stereotype is that it's, a single person, out there working in Bali, but it's really not.
Yeah.
The digital nomads are more and more family.
Yeah, and I think a large portion of them, like you said, are like either single people and young couples just starting out that don't have kids yet. But I've been the last 3 or 4 years, I've seen a lot of families being out there. I know when we first started RVing full time back in 2017, we felt like we were like lone wolves. And then there was a big explosion of full time, family travelers throughout the United States. And then RV parks got really hard to book and all this other stuff. And we switched over, more to overlanding and getting out more remotely and stuff. But we've still, encountered a lot of different families that are doing that, whether they're driving a big, giant rig, or they're doing multiple vehicles like us, or they're van lifing it with just one kid, or however that looks for them. But there are definitely more and more families out there, which I see continuing to grow. And I do think that I think you're right. I think the pandemic really kind of said, hey, I can work remotely and I can also take my kids with me and it's going to be okay, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think is the biggest tip you guys can give about a family that wants to start traveling internationally and schooling their children?
Well, Angela, yeah, do you want to follow up with that one? And also, she did a lot of research for the book on all the different occupations that people have on the road.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to mention, so we have an entire chapter in the book dedicated to financing your trip, whatever your trip looks like. And one of the things we always like to say is sometimes people approach this lifestyle and think you have to have financials that look a certain way. And we're careful not to say, oh, anybody can do it. But we do say almost anybody can do it. And there's so many creative ways to make it happen. I think of it in kind of 3 big categories. There's location dependent work. So people who take on seasonal roles or consulting work or assignments that are for a fixed period of time. And a lot of times they'll like save money and fund their next phase of travel that way.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all the digital nomads. And that doesn't mean just IT work. Sometimes I think those things get equated, but really it's any job you can take with you. And that can be hugely varied. And then there's also people who take their skills with them. Say they might have a trade skill. They might be a massage therapist, a teacher of some sort. All of those buckets are roles and jobs and professions you can take on the road with you. In the book, we have a page dedicated to just sort of a laundry list of all the things we heard from families over the years that they do. And our list is actually about 1/4 of what we heard. We culled it down, but it's really varied. And the message that we always want to leave people with is with careful planning and thinking about the job you have now and or the job you want to be doing. A lot of times there's a way to make it happen.
Absolutely. I've met everybody from traveling nurses to insurance adjusters to people working on oil rigs, people working on pipelines, people doing, just content creator, YouTube stuff. I myself work remotely as in IT. Not exciting, but it works. But yeah, you're right. There's all different kinds of ways to earn money. We've done seasonal volunteering at state parks, and I know people that volunteer at or do side jobs at national parks. And I think that there's, plenty of opportunities overseas to do those different types of short-term gigs as well and make
There's
money.
also, in addition to jobs, you can also use anything you already own. So a lot of people do rent out their house either for shorter,
Mhm.
long-term stays. They do house swaps. Not You can't earn money, but you're saving money on the other side on your accommodations. People even are renting out their cars and other assets while they're traveling. So that's actually a nice way to bring in an income stream if there are things you own and can leverage.
That's a really good point, actually. I just joined a world schooling group on Facebook that part of it is just about house swapping. Somebody needs somebody to be here and there, and they just kind
I'm in that group.
of work it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's pretty awesome. So, what are some obstacles you guys have run into while traveling and world schooling? Have you guys run into any issues or problems in any countries?
Hmm.
I'll share. This is not necessarily country specific, but
Okay.
it can. I think when you're traveling in the U.S., there's the idea of kind of, we're going to have great bandwidth. Some people think we can educate, with everybody online. And in a lot of countries, that's just not feasible.
Right.
When we were staying, for example, in the Greek islands, we did have good Wi Fi. I mean, good enough for one person to be on Zoom at a time. And, they kind of gave us an allowance for broadband usage, and we used it a month's worth up in 1 week. And then they
Yeah.
started charging us extra. So I do feel like, if you want to get off the beaten path, you have to kind of think beyond packaged curriculum and kind of get a little bit more creative. And in our education section of the book, we really go through, these are all the different ways that you can educate your kids yourself organically, not, just plugging into online education. But there's all different ways to do it. And just getting curious together, waking up in the morning and saying, hey, let's just, let's go downtown and see what's there. And oftentimes it will be one of the most educational experiences of the week or the month.
Absolutely. Angela, did you run into any issues?
I think two I would mention. One, we tried to stay ahead of, but you touched on it before, Misty. It's the community aspect for kids and staying connected to peers.
Mhm.
So before those world schooling communities were really blossoming, we tried to make sure that our two boys traveling with their parents and spending 99% of their time with them had other ways to tap in. So for us, that meant visits home. We created an itinerary that made space for returning to our home base. That, by the way, when we left on our trip, we were moving from that place. So we weren't going to return there. We were relocating. And so we built in ways to go and visit friends and family through the year to kind of, fill our kids' buckets, if you will, of time with kids their age. Friends and family joined us out on the road too. So people came along and camped with us from home, which was wonderful. I will say my older son got his first phone right before we left. So he had a way to stay in touch with friends, and even just online gameplay and things like that can kind of, fill that need sometimes too. I've heard other families talk about this as well. So in addition to world schooling communities, visiting local parks to meet other kids and other families, tapping into expat groups, so outside the country in particular. That's a great resource for families. And you're traveling somewhere you don't know, and sometimes you don't speak the language, tapping into expat groups can be really, really helpful.
One of the things that we did along those same lines is we had our kids join sports teams in New Zealand. And we were there for 3 months. And my daughter was on a competitive open ocean swim team. Yes,
Oh,
there is.
wow.
And we were immediately welcomed into the fold. And, there were, swim competitions that we were all camping out for. And so they had that social interaction. Yeah, so those are ways to kind of get around the social hurdle.
The second one I was going to mention is about healthcare and insurance, because this really comes up for people who start to go international because everything changes, right? So some insurance companies will cover outside the US and some don't. So there's all different kinds of plans that families need to consider. Healthcare, maybe potentially having evacuation coverage, particularly if you're doing things in remote areas or higher risk, in addition to whether or not you choose to do travel insurance. And so there are companies that specialize in international coverage for families traveling long term. And exploring those, or working even with a broker who, usually an insurance broker, makes money from the companies, not from the client. Can't speak
Mhm.
for everyone, but that can be really helpful for shopping around, because that's a confusing aspect for families. And it's one of the most often asked questions about, wait, I'm taking my kids out of the country for 8 months. How do we make sure we're covered in case of emergencies?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Just as people that are traveling with pets as well, if they have an unexpected illness, where do you go? What do you do? That's something that I've been researching myself. And we've had some other guests on recently that have talked about not only health insurance and dental, but also travel insurance and auto insurance, and how in every country that you go into, there's a certain process if you're going to bring your vehicle. So there's
Mhm.
a lot of logistics involved.
Mhm.
What other
Absolutely.
logistical type things would you guys recommend people look into? Or I know that you talk about that a little bit in your book, but what would you recommend for people to start researching if they plan on traveling like this?
Yeah, it's we do talk about it in the book, and we dedicate sort of a couple of chapters to it. There's one called Travel Logistics, but it shows up other places.
Mhm.
Just to step back for a second, one of the things we heard from families over and over again, and that we personally felt, was when you're starting out, it's really easy to feel overwhelmed by all the things you have to solve. So our book is written to kind of present the questions that feel overwhelming, and then begin to answer them and point people to other resources both. So sometimes you don't even know what you should be asking, which is sort of your question here, right? In the travel logistics piece, we talk about, deciding where to go. That can be a really fun and creative mission for a family to take on together, but it can also feel overwhelming. So we even try to give filters to people, like what they might consider when they're deciding where to go. And that can be domestic or international. Then it's,
Mhm.
how do you get there? It's, where do you stay? It's, what paperwork do you need before you go? Um, all the insurance pieces we were just talking about. How does it impact your financials back home, including paying taxes and all those other logistics? Communicating, staying, connected, both in terms of Wi-Fi, but even when you're really off grid. And the two of you probably know much more about that than I do, but we do try to give that some time and attention too. My family did go really far off grid. We always had a satellite communicator with us. And so all those little detailed kinds of things that you may or may not know about, we try to give a mention, so that really, if somebody's using our book, it can be the go-to source, sort of start to finish, all the pieces you might need to know.
Perfect. That's awesome. Annika, did you have anything else to add to that?
Um, well, I think Angela, kind of covered all the bases there, but I really do think that what we really try to do, because it just can feel so insurmountable, is just, give the reader a checklist to start ticking through all those questions and answers. And sometimes there are just really surprising ways through. And I'll give you one example. Um, in Nepal, we were really starting to look at evacuation insurance, which can be extremely expensive.
Mhm.
And there are ER doctors that can be on call for a family, but you pay like a membership fee. And then we realized that our travel credit card would cover international evacuation from Nepal.
Oh,
And it was
wow.
included. We had no idea. So there's all kinds of really interesting, creative solutions to all the questions that will be on any potential family travelers list.
Yeah, you guys both brought up a good point about it being overwhelming for sure, because, like I said, I've been homeschooling for years, but taking the kids to other countries and figuring out the logistics for 5 people and all of that, it does seem a little daunting. I'm not going to lie about that.
Mhm.
it feels a little overwhelming at times, but I think that part of that is the adventure,
Mhm.
and part of figuring all of that out, whether with assistance or without, is just part of the whole journey of
Yeah, it's
travel.
part of the learning too, right? And including your kids in as much of that as you can.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You have such a head start, though. I mean, given what you've done already, it's such a head start. And one of the things somebody shared with us, and we like to share with other families, is for those who don't have a head start, they really, haven't traveled much with their kids yet, is start closer to home and for shorter
Mhm.
durations, and then build on both of those things. Go further and go longer. And that seems to work really well for families, particularly with young kids. See how the kids do. See what
Mhm.
kind of travelers they are. What do they need? What do you need to bring? It's good practice.
And that would
Absolutely.
really help kind of narrow down where you're going to go. If you
Mhm.
realize, what's really important is X, Y, or Z and those shorter trips, then it's going to help you plan out more extended family travel.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that Arla and I teach in our beginner overlanding classes. When people start, where do I start? Start locally, start close to home. That way, if you forget something at home, you can run back and get it if you need to. Go out for a couple of days, see what works, what doesn't, and adjust accordingly, right? The same principles that would happen, obviously, if you're overseas and you forget something or something doesn't go the way that you expect it to, you have to make a little bit different accommodations or plans for that. But I think overall, it's the similar theme, like you said, just start small and kind of build from there.
Mhm.
It's true with people and with gear and accommodations. I'll just share, my husband and I just got a different RV. We downsized and we're taking it out for the first time this weekend, and we're camping half an hour from here because we don't know what yet we will have forgotten and what won't be working. And so we can run home.
So you're doing a shakedown,
We are
basically.
doing a shakedown.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a must do.
Yes.
Perfect. So is there anything else you guys would like to, anything that we haven't asked you yet that you wanted to make sure you mentioned about the book or about your travels?
Ani, do you want to talk about reentry, or I can, or you can?
Yeah, I think
That's a good
that's a
one.
good one. Yeah, so we have an entire chapter in our book on re-entry. And, so much when you're excited to go on the trip, you think about the logistics and the planning and there all the, how are you going to do education, all of those kinds of things. But I think what can really sneak up on people is how difficult re-entry can be. And by re-entry, it could be if you're in an RV going around the United States and then you're coming back to a fixed location, that could be reentry. It could also be reverse culture shock from one part of the United States to another. But it also, if you're living overseas for an extended period of time and then coming home, it can be a lot. And
Mhm.
also separating. We all had the same experience when we came home after being a solid unit for a year or more. It felt really strange for everybody to go back to their room. And we all started sleeping in the same, the kids were in the sleeping bag on the floor because it just seemed really strange to separate. So all of those things can kind of be that re-entry dynamic that can be pretty hard for both parents and kids. A lot of times, my kids always had the question of, "What was your favorite place?" But they
Mhm.
had so much more they wanted to share. So really being able to slowly process with each other is, I think, a really, really important part of reentry. But we go through in all kinds of different elements of that reentry and how to make it a bit easier.
Absolutely. And our son that kind of went through that when we finally moved into a condo we were renting after traveling full time for so long. He did not want to sleep in his own room. He came and slept on the floor in our room because he refused to go and sleep in there. And he was 13 years old at the time. And he was like, nope, I don't want anything to do with that right now. And it took us a few days to get him, kind of acclimated to where he would go and sleep in his own room. But he was so used to sleeping in the tent with my husband that he just didn't like it. He didn't know what to do with himself.
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely an adjustment when you're switching from one type of lifestyle or travel, or being all together, like you said, back to a sticks and bricks house or back to public school or back to the United States from being somewhere else. There's always going to be an adjustment period. Have you guys had any more issues with your kids adjusting back to the standard lifestyle, or do you guys still travel with them pretty extensively?
So we landed in Boulder after traveling. And so my kids were moving to a new town completely where they knew no one.
Mm,
And it was a little bumpy for sure. I think one kid more than the other. They both originally chose a school and ended up switching approaches within a year or two to something quite different. My older kid ended up doing hybrid all the way until he graduated. My younger kid switched to a school that looked a lot like world schooling, little funky alternative school that was such a great fit for him. And that happened because of our travel years. But meeting new kids coming off 2 years of living in a really different way, it took some time. Annika is so good about making sure to emphasize, keeping communication really open with your kids is so key through all of this, right? You are choosing a different lifestyle as a family
mhm.
and involving the kids and having those conversations about the impact on them and giving them a voice in it is so important. And that is, I think, especially important as you try to re-enter, what looks really different than living on the road.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll add to that my 13-year-old, when she came home, she did not want to be different, right? And so she really didn't want anyone to know that what we'd been doing for the last year. And then the younger kids, they just wouldn't stop talking about it. So all kids are different with
Yeah.
how they come back. Um, and I will share that my oldest is now studying marine biology at University of Hawaii. And so much of that is, we live in Colorado. She wouldn't have had the exposure to oceans had we not left home. So you never know what kids will pick up as their passion moving forward. So it's just, the whole definition, I think, of world schooling, we talk about this in our book, is really using the world as a classroom and exposing your kids to as much as you can.
And even if you can't do it full time, doing it on the weekends, doing it part time. I know like Arla works full time in an office. Her daughter goes to public school, but getting out there on the weekends and going exploring new places and as much as possible is another way that you can do that if you don't have the ability or financial means or whatever to travel like that, or maybe doing shorter trips in the summer when school is out or things like that. There's lots of different ways to expose your children to different cultures and educational options, I believe.
We say the exact same thing in the book and in conversation. This is a mindset. It's not necessarily the logistics. It's being curious as you head out the door, and that can be right outside the door. I always think of it when I think of camping, because our family does camp a lot. We spend a lot of time in RVs across the years. And I always think there's things you can be doing world schooling even inside your RV. There's things you can do right outside the door in your campsite. And then there are things you can do in whatever is nearby, town or country, wherever you are. And, we can all fit that into field trips or weekend camping trips or whatever you're able to do as a family.
Absolutely.
Or hosting exchange students as well. I mean, that is such a way to open the world. That's immediately when we came home, we hosted young people in our home. And so I think and spring break took on a whole new meaning, right? Where do we want to learn about? Let's go to the American South. We'd never been there. There's just, it is a mindset.
I bet that was a really neat experience seeing through the exchange students' eyes the United States, right? Taking them to all these different places that we kind of may take for granted, that I'm sure that they were very amazed at some of the places that you took them.
Yes, and I'll also share that, when you're on the road, I feel like one of the biggest lessons is the kindness that strangers are shown wherever you are. In the United States, going overseas, just, the art of hosting and welcoming someone. And I feel like we'd been so appreciative and like, my goodness, how do we take in all this kindness all the time when we were on the road? That then when we hosted exchange students, it was our way to give back, right? Kind of paying it forward, so to speak. But it's more, we'd been shown so much kindness. We learned a bit more about how to show kindness to others.
Yeah, I was sitting here wondering, what is I guess your favorite country that you went to, first of all, since you both have traveled the world, basically.
I always feel like really at home in the outer latitudes. So whenever I get like really far north or really far south, it kind of feels like coming home. I recently did my 23andMe, and that is completely validated in my genetic history. But my very favorite place in the world is Patagonia, like really southern Argentina and Chile. It's so rugged and remote and outdoorsy and kind of raw and gorgeous that I love it there. And, you know, some of the outer reaches in other places too, like Scotland and Iceland. And I think Ani mentioned New Zealand. They all share qualities. And I will say my kids love those places too. And I feel like it's also where they've been able to test some physical limits and some, you know, show some bravery and try new things in the outdoors that have been really rewarding for them. And I have lovely memories of them doing those things. So I associate that with those locations too.
We need to definitely talk offline.
Okay.
These are the areas we were planning on going. Annika?
You know, it's a bit like choosing your favorite child here.
You won't tell.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I lived and worked in Thailand. So I feel like I should say Thailand, but I'm going to deviate from that. I love Thai people. I love Thai culture, but it is extremely hot, and my kids did not do well with the heat. And I loved New Zealand. I thought that, you know, you have like that just rugged beauty. You've got there, I think they have more sheep than people in the country. So there's not the crowds that you feel in the United States really anywhere you go. And, you know, the people are so nice. We rented an RV in Christchurch on the southern island, and we're, you know, they just give you the RV, and we're on not the wrong side, a different side of the road. And so
Which feels wrong.
Right.
Yeah. You're extra wide. You're on the other side of the road, and it was like rush hour in Christchurch, which, you know, still it is, you know, a larger city for New Zealand. And we just pulled off the road. You know, we said, let's just wait till it's daylight and just, you know, boondock right here if we can. So there was a guy passing by. We were right on the coast. And we said, do you know if we can camp right here? Is this okay? And he kind of like, I'm not sure, but, you know, I live right down the road. If anybody gives you a hard time, I'm in number 16, just park in our driveway. How long have you been on the road? Do you have any laundry that you need done? You know, just so kind, you know, when you're expecting maybe someone saying, don't park here, but just the kindness of the people was just wonderful. So I would highly recommend New Zealand. Plus, you can communicate.
I like it.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because people have asked us, you know, because my husband and I have traveled internationally with all the kids. People always ask us, what's your favorite place? What's your favorite place? And we kind of say, I don't know. We might not have been there yet. We might not have gone there yet. So I don't know, you know.
There's that old quote, my favorite place is anywhere I've never been.
Exactly. That's kind of how we are. It drives people crazy, but we're always wanting to explore a new place and go and, you know, travel and find new things. It drives our kids crazy. I know that.
My phrase on this was novelty is my only addiction and travel feeds the beast.
Good one.
Absolutely. So I put a little ticker on the bottom of the screen. Obviously, you know, your book can be purchased in paperback or in Kindle on Amazon. Are there any other places that you guys have where your book is available?
Well, if you don't remember anything else, you can go to wonderyear.com because we have a site that launches to multiple places you can purchase. In
Perfect.
Colorado, you can get it at REI, we're thrilled to say. You can also order on bookshop.org or barnesandnoble.com, and actually many places where books are sold.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And I'll just throw up a little, that's what the book looks
There
like,
we are.
folks. So if you're out there wandering around, that's what it looks like. And it's by Julie, Angela, and Annika. Thank you again, guys, so much for being on the show. And we look forward to our paths crossing at some point. And I cannot wait to dive into the book a little deeper. And I'm sure I'll have more questions as I get further along in it. So thank you
Reach
again,
out
guys.
anytime. We welcome hearing from you. And thank you so much for having us on tonight.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Everyone have a great evening, and we'll see you next week.